Before beginning your tile project, be sure and watch our video preparing your subfloor for ceramic and porcelain floor tile installation. In order for your tile project to be successful, it's critical that you ensure your subfloor is appropriate for the install. To start planning the layout of your tile, you must first find the center point of the room. To do this, measure the 4 walls in the room and find the midpoints. Then, snap 2 chalk lines, one from the midpoints of 2 opposite walls and another from the midpoints of the 2 other walls. Where they intersect will be the room's center point. Check that the chalk lines are square by marking points 3 feet on one chalk line and 4 feet on a perpendicular chalk line starting at the intersection. Measure the diagonal space between each of these 2 points. If the distance between the two is exactly 5 feet, the lines are square. If the lines aren't square, the tiles will not be centered and the room might not look balanced. If the room is not square, which is very common, you will need to make adjustments to the position of one line and then square the other line using the 3-4-5 procedure. Next, you'll want to lay a single half row of tiles in both directions without mortar, starting at the center point and working outward. You do this in order to ensure the finished project will be centered. Insert spacers between the tiles. Stop when there is not enough room for a full tile. If the space at the end of either row is smaller than 1/3 of a tile, you'll want to adjust the chalk lines so half tiles appear on both sides of the room. Since you started in the center, 1/3 of a tile on one end means that you'd have 2/3 of a tile on the other end of the room and it will look off center. After making any adjustments, be sure to re-snap your chalk lines. Before laying your tile, you should pull tiles from different boxes and mix them. Don't just use tile in order from one box at a time. Sometimes slight tonal differences can occur between different boxes of tile. By mixing the tiles as you go, you'll spread and mix these differences throughout your floor and they won't be noticeable. Many floor tiles today have multiple graphics in each box. These are usually tiles that are designed to emulate natural stone and a random look when installed. Also, be aware that some tiles have directional arrows on the back. You must keep these arrows pointing in the same direction as you lay out the tiles to ensure pattern alignment. When installing tile, be sure to wear safety glasses and rubber gloves when mixing and applying mortar. Also, consider wearing knee pads to evenly distribute your body weight and save your knees. You'll be glad you did. Read the mixing instructions on the back of the package to ensure proper mixing of the mortar mix. One more thing, when tiling an area that will butt up against a different kind of flooring like carpet or hardwood, a threshold transition is needed. Check with one of our store associates prior to your project to find out which type is right for your project and when it should be installed. Some go in before tiling begins and some are installed at the end of your project. Thin-set mortar is the cement or bonding agent used to attach the tile to the backer board or concrete subfloor. Use a large bucket and drill with a mixing paddle. Be sure to clean the mixing paddle promptly so the mortar does not harden on it. Some mortars are labeled as non-modified and require a latex polymer admixture which will improve the performance of the mortar and increase bond strength. But most mortars come already modified. Porcelain floor tile must always be installed using a polymer modified thinset to achieve the appropriate bond between the tile and the substrate receiving the tile. This also applies to exterior installations. Also, mortars must be allowed to stand for 5 to 10 minutes after mixing. They cannot be used immediately. Slake time, as this is referred to, allows the chemicals in the mortar to fully activate. Make sure you follow the instructions on your mortar mix package. For wood subfloors where a backer board was installed, be sure to moisten the backer board by misting it with a spray bottle filled with water before spreading the thinset. Spray the backer board as you work. If you don't do this, the backer board will soak up water from the mortar, causing it to dry too rapidly. This will impact how well your tiles adhere to the subfloor. Take care not to mix too large a batch of thinset. It has a limited working life, and if you've mixed too much, it will start to harden before you've had a chance to use all of it. If this happens, you'll need to discard it and mix more. Do not add water after the thinset begins to harden because this weakens the cement and severely affects the bonding between the tile and the backer board. Mix up a bucket of thinset mortar appropriate for the type of tile you're installing. There are differences, so check with the store associate to ensure you make the right choice. Plan your installation so that you have an exit without stepping on any of the tiles before the thinset hardens, which takes approximately 24 hours. In other words, don't tile yourself into a corner. Trowels have both a smooth edge and a notched edge. The notches are called teeth. The type and size of the tile you're installing will determine the depth and the width of the teeth your trowel should have. Check installation materials packaging for guidance. The size of the notch determines how much thinset is left on the floor receiving the tile. Typically, the larger the tile, the larger the notch needed. This helps when leveling larger tiles and prevents lippage or a trip hazard between tiles. Use your trowel to scoop out a generous amount of mortar from your mix bucket. Starting in one quadrant at the center point of the room where your chalk lines intersect, begin spreading the thinset with the flat side of the trowel and press it into the backer board at roughly a 45-degree angle. This will ensure the mortar fully adheres to the backer board. To begin, you should do one test tile to ensure the consistency of the mortar is appropriate. Put the first test tile onto the thinset bed. Lay the tile flat and slightly twist it and gently press it down evenly in the centers and corners. Pull the tile up and check the back of the tile. It should be completely covered with thinset. If you have areas on the tile not covered with mortar, it means you either did not mix the mortar properly, did not spread the mortar evenly, or waited too long to set your first tile and the mortar started to dry. It also might be because you didn't evenly and firmly press the tile into the mortar. Correct as necessary and proceed. Once you've confirmed you have the right consistency in the mortar, relay your first tile, ensuring it's still lining up with the chalk lines at the center and that it is fully pressed back into the mortar. Next, place two spacers along the side where you will add a tile. Use two spacers, one on each end. Spacers are used to easily and quickly ensure equal spacing between tiles. Always position your spacers so they stick up and out. A common mistake is to lay them on their side in the corners where four tiles meet. If you do this, they become embedded in the mortar and can be very hard to remove. Also, grouting over those spacers will compromise the integrity of the grout by creating a thin spot in the cement. Next, set your second tile by aligning the edges and corners, hinging it down and slightly twisting it back and forth. Comb the thinset using the notched side of your trowel, holding the trowel at a 45-degree angle to the floor and lightly pressing the trowel teeth to the floor. Make sure you comb the thinset in one direction. Avoid circular or swirling patterns. Also, don't push so hard that you remove the thinset entirely from the floor. The combed channels will flatten out and compress when the tile is placed, ensuring the proper amount of mortar is present beneath the tile. To avoid having excess mortar squirt out from under the tiles into the spaces between, use a small, thin trowel to remove a small amount around the edges of your tiles as you go. Do not allow the thinset to skim over or start drying as you go. If it does, remove it and apply new thinset. As you lay your tile, always check them for dirt or dust. Wipe them clean if needed. The dust can affect how effectively they adhere to the mortar. If you're new to tiling, you may only want to apply enough mortar for one or two tiles at a time. When choosing where to place the next tiles, know that it really doesn't matter as long as you keep two things in mind. Follow your chalk lines to ensure your tiles are going down in a straight line, and make sure you're not tiling yourself into a corner. After installing 3 or 4 tiles, place a 2x4 on top and tap lightly with a rubber mallet. This will level the tiles and embed them firmly into the mortar. Then continue spreading mortar and setting additional tiles. Throughout the process, use a damp sponge to clean off any mortar that ends up on the top of the tiles. Do not let it dry. Once dry, mortar on the finished floor is extremely hard to remove. Also, check your alignment by stepping back every so often and looking down the tile edges to be sure the lines are straight. This should be done often before the mortar starts to dry and harden. If you find alignment issues while the mortar is still wet, you will be able to straighten them before continuing. If you need to take a break, always scrape up any mortar overlapping into an area you are about to tile. If left to dry, it will affect how well those new tiles adhere when you return to work those areas. Finish laying full tiles in your first quadrant. You'll then be left with the space between those tiles and the wall where cut tiles are required. Again, lay tiles so that you do not tile yourself into a corner, which would force you to walk on the newly installed tiles. Finish laying all full tiles in your other 3 quadrants and let the mortar harden. Different mortars have different curing times, but most require you to stay off the tile for 24 hours. Just follow the manufacturer's instructions. Now you're ready to start cutting tiles. For this task you have 2 options, a manual snap cutter and an electric wet saw. The manual cutter is generally used for smaller jobs, but for larger jobs that require cutting on a large number of tiles, you will need to purchase or rent a wet saw. If you ever do a tiling project with natural stone, know that you always use a wet saw with those to prevent the tiles from breaking or chipping. Another tool you'll find yourself needing is a tile nipper. These are used to make specialty cuts needed around things like plumbing fixtures, pipes, and round corners. To cut a curve, mark the cutting line, then cut away bits of tile with the tile nippers. Wear safety glasses when working with the nippers and smooth the cut edges with an abrasive stone. To figure out where to cut a tile that will fit into a space left along the wall, place the tile that you're going to cut directly on top of the next full tile near the wall. Then, place 2 tiles upright against the wall. This will leave an expansion gap between the tiles and the wall, which will allow the floor to expand without causing cracks. It will also account for the space needed for the grout line. Then, place a 4th tile against those 2 tiles and on top of the tile to be cut. Trace along the edge of the 4th tile with a China marker to draw a line on the 1st tile. This is where you will make your cut. Once you cut the tile, it will fit perfectly in the space. Now, to avoid confusion, lay out, mark, and cut small groups of tile at a time. Then leave those cut tiles in the space where they will be installed. Also plan to install your cut tiles in small groups to avoid mixing too much mortar and risking it drying out before you can use it all. To be safe, measure twice before cutting. To use the manual snap cutter, align the cutting wheel with the cut line you made with your China marker. Raise the pressing bar and push the cutting wheel away from you using moderate pressure. This will score the tile. Then lift the cutting wheel, lower the pressing tee, and strike the handle to snap the tile. When using the wet saw, always wear safety glasses. Adjust the fence or guide so the cut mark lines up with the blade. Hold the tile with both hands and advance the tile into the blade guided by the fence. Cut slowly to avoid chipping the tile. Change the tile saw blades when cuts are not clean. Be aware that wet saws do splash water and tile residue during operation. The final step in tiling is applying grout. There are several types of grout available. Poly blend grout in both sanded and non-sanded, Fusion Pro, a single component grout that never needs to be sealed, simple pre-mixed grout, a no-mix alternative to traditional grout, and epoxy grout. Be sure and ask a store associate which type is right for your project. Grout fills the spaces between the tiles. Use the grout coverage conversion charts on the back of the package to determine the amount of grout needed. And always wear rubber gloves and safety glasses when working with grout. Before grouting, you must remove all of your tile spacers. Again, leaving the spacers in place and grouting over them will compromise the integrity of the grout. You'll also want to protect baseboards, trim, and neighboring floors with painter's tape. And make sure you've purchased the correct type of grout. For joints 1/8 to 1/2 inch, use a sanded grout. For joints up to 1/8 inch, use a non-sanded grout. We will be using a cement-based grout for this install. To mix cement-based grout, use a drill and mortar paddle in a bucket. Almost all cement grouts have latex polymer in the powder mix. Others require a latex polymer admixture. Follow your manufacturer's instructions. Similar to thinset, Once the cement grout is mixed, allow it to stand for 10 minutes before applying, and avoid mixing too much grout at one time. Just mix enough for small sections at a time until you become comfortable with the spreading process and can increase your speed. And don't forget to wear safety glasses. Spread grout in sweeping arcs with the rubber grout float held at a shallow angle. Apply at a 45-degree angle to the spaces between the tiles to prevent the float from pressing into the spaces and creating uneven grout surfaces. Press grout into the joints, filling them completely. Focus on small 4x4 foot sections. After the grout is spread, remove the excess with the grout float held at a 45-degree angle. Work diagonally across the joints, again to avoid dipping into the joints. The cement grout will set up in about 5 to 15 minutes and have a putty-like consistency. As soon as you complete one section, take a damp sponge and do very light passes across the tiles diagonally to clean off the excess grout. Wring the sponge out until no water drips from it before cleaning. Excess water left behind can affect the consistency of the grout. Use both edges of each side of the sponge. Be careful not to press the sponge into the gaps. The drier the grout is on the tile surface, the harder it is to remove. Do as many passes as needed. The tiles won't be clean on the first pass, so just be patient. Rinse the sponge frequently in clean water and change the rinse water often. The cleaner the water is, the more effectively it will remove the grout from the surface of your tiles. Remove any remaining haze by using an old t-shirt or cheesecloth. If you have trouble, try adding a grout haze remover solution. Try and remove all of the haze before it dries completely. Again, the drier it becomes, the harder it is to remove. Help to slowly cure the grout by misting it twice a day for 3 days. Do not walk over the surface for 8 to 12 hours to avoid getting debris and dirt in the grout lines. Grout Sealer provides unsurpassed invisible protection for grout. Sealing your grout is critical to keeping grout lines clean and looking like new. Sealers help prevent stains and keep mildew and mold from growing into the grout. It's also easy to apply. You can choose a sealer with a built-in applicator or pick up a grout sealer application bottle. Another option is a product like Stain Blocker. It's a grout additive that is mixed with grout to provide exceptional stain resistance during the curing process. Ask a store associate which sealer or additive is best for your install. Follow the manufacturer's instructions on when to apply your sealer. In most cases, you'll want to allow the grout to cure for about 3 days. Regardless of which you choose, you can expect your grout sealer to last an average of 1 to 2 years before needing to reapply it. To test, drop water on the grout. If it seems to soak in, it's time to reseal. Make sure to wipe away any excess within 10 minutes. If you're using glazed tile, be extra careful to only seal the grout. To finish your project, remove the tape from any protected surfaces. Cover the 1/4-inch expansion gap left along the walls. You can do this with either matching bullnose tile or wood 1/4-round molding or just regular baseboards. And finally, if you weren't required to do so earlier in the process, now add any desired thresholds between your tiled floor and neighboring floors. And with that, your tile project is complete.